From the West Barn podcast, Best of 2020. During the holiday breaks, we're taking time here to shine the light on some of the past episodes that are some of our favorites. Today, we bring you Jon Kaplan. He's a mix engineer from Los Angeles, California. We found out this week that Jon was nominated for Album of the Year, a Grammy for Album of the Year for the Black Pumas. So that's incredible. He's also nominated in another category. Enjoy. We'll see you soon. Jon Kaplan from the West Barn, Best of 2020. Hey, it's From the West Barn with Joe West
and Mike Shimshack.
We're here today with the great Jon Kaplan,
Mixer extraordinaire.
Mixer extraordinaire, and it's an interesting career path to end up as a mixer, but he has achieved it. No more sitting in on countless hours of vocal sessions.
I try and do that as rarely as I can.
Based out of Los Angeles.
Truth, currently.
How long have you been there?
2013.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about like what is the topography of your career or the vector of your career? When did you know you could be like, for those who don't know, to be a mix engineer is like, it's essentially the highest you can get in the audio arts, you know what I mean?
I guess, yeah.
What would be higher?
Perceived that way.
Mastering engineer seems higher, but it isn't.
I think it all gets a little too much credit, so I have a hard time with these like rankings.
Well, okay, let's stop being self-deprecating and for a moment.
Well, just the craft a little. Well, my main example is some of the worst mixes in the world are some of the favorite songs, and they're just amazing. So
that's true.
As much as I love what I do and think it's valuable.
But people put all of their eggs in one basket, and that you are currently the basket that they put it in.
True.
Yes. So tell me how you sort of arrived at that destination. How much time did you spend working your way in the other parts of production to get to be a mixer?
Yeah, I was a little all over the map. I was a musician. I was an artist in a band, like a jam band in the early 90s called the Hatters. We were on Atlantic. We would tour with, like Blues Traveler and Spin Doctors and Dave Matthews, that like world. And I always wanted to be a producer, actually. That was always I listened to those records. I want to be that name on the back, the guy who like assembled it. And so I think even though I didn't understand really audio, I think I understood how the parts went together. That was like my early interpretation, I think, of how I heard things. And then like, I don't know. I just kind of fell. I was working in New York at a recording studio, just answering phones, trying to bring bands in.
Which studio?
Right Track Recording, which was it was a great room.
Great location if you wanted a guitar pick or a Pro Tools.
Yeah, exactly. It was right on 48th, right next
downstairs.
To all that. Yeah, great studio. A lot of big clients. They like Phil Ramone worked out of there regularly. But I didn't really know anything about engineering. I was again, I wanted to be a producer. I just wanted to like the fifth Beatle guy. That was kind of my mentality towards music. And I played bass, and I would play on things a little bit. I was a little bit of a session, low-level session guy in New York at the same time. And then Pro Tools showed up. So we're talking 97 in New York. And there were a couple dudes, like, who went to Berkeley, some young kids that were computer dudes and knew they were just badass, knew how to fucking do everything with that, knew everything about computers, knew about Pro Tools. I was a guy who never owned a computer, but me and my friend were like, dude, everyone's getting Pro Tools. Why don't we get computers? And I literally... Because there was an opportunity, my dad backed a loan. I got a Pro Tools rig. I was learning on the fly.
Where did you get it from?
Oh, God, I probably one of the, like, this, not Sam Ash's, like, audio, high-end audio.
Yeah. And do you remember what you paid for it?
It was a $12,000 loan for, like, the computer, the whole thing, a rack, I think.
I can remember buying a Rourke Data chassis from my SCSI hard drives.
Yeah.
And I only loaded it half full because I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford it. I had a 9 gigabyte drive in it.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, when will I ever need more than 9? I'm done. It's 9 gigabytes.
I remember.
I have 128 gigabytes on my key rig right now.
That's something you have in common, right? You both had early rigs that were
early rigs.
Yeah, but you were probably an engineer and knew what you were doing. I was, dude, and I tell you, I knew nothing. And I would go in these sessions, and I was like, because I worked at this high-level recording studio, I was able to kind of get on these things. And I'd be working with these great, talented engineers who still think what I'm doing is amazing.
You were the Pro Tools guy.
Yeah, and I was terrible at it, but I'm still taking them 4 days quicker do something. Now it would take me like an hour. It took me like a day because I'm reading the manual. I'm learning on the fly.
And the manuals early on were just like, you might as well just set them on fire.
I loved that manual. I learned how to get Pro Tools in the
just
manual.
being counterproductive.
I read the whole, all I know is that's all I knew. And that was how I learned Pro Tools.
It was like a direct translate from Japanese to.
No,
like
that was
literally.
Logic. Logic would have things you'd go into the glossary for something and it would still be in German. Like they were literally like I wanted certain things like that. But
so you ended up being a Pro Tools operator. So you
Pro
did a lot
Tools
of
guy.
editing.
But the good thing back then is you're thrown on. Nothing was being recorded to the grid. It was you were a problem solver. Like you'd work on a hip hop track. Like someone would, they'd record the track and they'd dump it to a DAT. Someone would send it to another studio. No time code, no lock. Dump that to a new piece of tape. Record vocals and wonder why it doesn't line up later because there was no sync. So by hand. Fortunately, I was musical, so I'd be able to, that guy made the vocals sit right in the pocket. So like that would get me gigs.
So when you were early on at Right Tracks, what are some of the notable records you worked on as a Pro Tools operator?
I worked like a lot of Mariah Carey stuff in the back. But again, a lot of it was like B-level stuff, a lot of hip-hop stuff. That was initially. Then I started doing my buddy was an engineer. Jason Goldstein was starting to do a lot of mixing for like the Trackmasters and ended up doing a lot of the Roots records. So he'd start throwing me like engineering gigs. So I'd just be like tracking the MPC into I'd start to kind of just get in the room.
I think this is an interesting point because the people that I imagine watching what it is we do here, like they're wondering how it happens for other people. And I think it's interesting when you see like your friend became in a position to throw you some work.
He came up from an assist. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want to know the grand analysis, in my opinion, when people ask, how does your career work? You find, I think, 3, 4, if you're lucky, 5 clients that are your clients, and you stay with them for your life. If you hit some grand slams, you do Nevermind or you do something like that, you're going to work forever. People will keep calling you. But a general dude, I've done well. I like to say I've hit a lot of singles and doubles, But there's a couple clients I'd work for, and they'll keep calling me, whether it's a record label, whether it's a certain artist, and it just keeps you moving. And then you have your ups and downs of maybe something resonates more as a hit or not. And then you'll have a nice influx, but when it's slow, you're back to those guys, and they're still calling you because they know you're good. You get their work done. Some are indie, some are, So friends, you work hard, you hustle. I had a good relationship with Jason. And then
And mostly at Right Track, this is in New York City.
It was like a 2 or 3 year period. I worked there. I think that the manager at the time said there was a 2-year period where it went from 95% of records being made on tape to 95% of records being made in Pro Tools. And that's right when I was there. It was totally timing and luck. Otherwise,
I was there as well, and I had the rare genius idea, and most of my genius ideas end up in great financial peril. So this studio, I guess it's undecided. But the really good one that I had was to buy a Pro Tools rig in 1998.
That's
same time you bought yours.
98, 99.
I worked on a record with a guy who worked at Rudy's and got his employee discount. But all in with all my interfaces and SMPTE slave driver because you had to have one of those to lock up the tape. I ended up having this Pro Tools rig that was really doable. But the smart thing I did was I made sure it would fit on one of those collapsible dollies. Remember in New York City, these guys would have these dollies that would kind of fold up into like a package size this big, but it was an actual real dolly. It had nice neoprene wheels and
the rock and roller.
I don't know if
Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
It was a really strong one, and I could put my interfaces on it. I could put my my computer, which was a Mac 9600. So we're talking about a tower computer.
I think I had the same one.
I took what looked like a Burger King monitor. Whenever you go through the drive-through Burger King, and they've got a screen that's maybe as big as this. So I took that, and that was my monitor. And I was able to get into the back of a cab. My role was I want to be able to get to the back of a cab and go anywhere in New York City at the call.
I had my mom's old Volvo station wagon, and I had the rack. It was the most ungainly. It was like tall and long, and you could just tilt it over and slide it into the back of the Volvo station wagon. And I'd park on the street and move it, on 16th
There was
Street,
a little moment there in New York City where you could make a killing if you owned a Pro Tools rig.
Yeah.
I made $500 a day as a tracking engineer. Mm-hmm. The record companies, for one reason or another, just would not pay more than $500. And if they did, you would get paid like 2 years later. So to get paid timely, it was $500 a day, but I could charge another $500 for my Pro Tools rig.
I went for $500 for a Pro Tools rig and would bill $75 an hour as a Pro Tools editor. It was and I sucked. But I got good. You got good quick because the challenge was you were editing. It wasn't like cutting and pasting loops. You had to learn how to use that thing
for the first time.
Fast.
How do I do
under
this
the gun
with that?
With big complicated things? So the quick key, like I got really good at it because I had to. It was a necessity.
Well, I ended up making so much money off of that rig that I would put it in my apartment. I'd put it in envelopes and tape it behind like the sink.
That's
my
amazing.
wife would call me. I'd be somewhere making a record in Europe or somewhere out of town, and she'd be like, "Hey, I'm really low on money." I'm like, "Well, look," and I have like a little map in my head. Go lift the top of the toilet. There's an envelope
amazing.
with $1,000 taped in there.
That's amazing.
Because as an independent contractor, 1099 contractor in New York, you don't want to be putting it in the bank necessarily.
That's true.
Because when it comes in as cash, it can kind of leave as cash without anyone really knowing about it. But that was a great era. That era, subsequently went away. Mm-hmm. How long were you in New York City for?
25 years, probably.
So what's the rest of those 25 years look like? You at different studios?
I fell into some more freelance work. I went out on my own, stumbled around doing that a little bit, hooked up with
Is this mostly Pro Tools stuff?
Pro Tools initially, yeah. And then ended up kind of as an in-house Pro Tools guy, but then moreover, went into a studio business with a guy named Pete Robinson, who's a big deal out here now. And Pete he
was a big deal up there. BMG.
Well, he was.
His company's called.
I know his company's called Big Deal. He signed Dave Matthews.
Yeah,
and he was with Bruce Flora, and he was just a great dude, great mentor, and we developed projects together that enabled me to kind of get my first. We developed an artist called Lola Ray that ended up getting picked up and released, so it kind of spread the word. And simultaneously, I was doing Pro Tools for a great, amazing friend and producer named Neil Dorfman, who, produced Sting and McCartney and
Dire Straits.
Yeah, recorded The River as an engineer, came up with Power Station and that, old world recording, 80s. So it kind of just all was happening, and I was just hustling whatever the hell I could do while trying to bring bands in and produce and all that. And then through that studio with Pete, I kind of started having to, out of necessity, twist my own knobs a little bit more, of which I learned how to. I became an okay recording engineer, and watching, if you're alongside someone like Neil Dorfman for a couple of years and you don't learn something, you're an idiot, because he's so good at what he does. It's amazing. For paying any attention, you're going to walk out in the top 10% of engineers because he's so good, So, and I found I just liked mixing. It was kind of like the tracking, because I didn't come up in a studio. I never was an assistant. I was always skipping grades and I could get it done, but if something's broken, I never kind of exactly knew it on the fly. I hadn't had that broke 5 other times, knew how to fix it real quick. I was always too nervous, But mixing, you got, if something screws up, you take a break and you figure it out. You had time. I think I had good ears and instincts for it. It just took a while to learn the craft, but I enjoyed that. It was a little scientific. I love kind of digging in. So, you stumbled into a few things that did well, opened some other doors, that kind of.
So for the rest of your time, you were sort of based out of one studio, many studios?
I was at that studio for 5 years, a couple years.
Is that called Dumbo?
It was called Dumbo.
Dumbo,
exactly.
right?
Yep. It was in Chelsea.
Do you remember working on a record for a band that was on it? Well, it eventually ended up on Atlantic, but it was a band called Seventh House.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Because I had made a record, and then Pete loved this record and ended up cutting tracks out at his place. I assume maybe you were.
Was it called Seventh House?
The band was called Seventh House.
I mean, first of all, I don't remember anything anymore. But Pete was doing he also had a studio. It was Dumbo first in Brooklyn with Charlton Pettis. They had a studio together, and then when he moved it to Chelsea, kept calling it Dumbo. So I was only involved in that part of it.
Okay, Chelsea. This was out in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So talk to us about why you moved to Los Angeles.
I moved because my wife worked for Capitol Records, and they moved us, basically. I was never planning on moving to LA. We were New Yorkers through and through. We're never leaving that island of Manhattan. We were
A fun fact, by the way, before we get away from Dumbo, is I met John. I was John's assistant.
That's right, you were.
Oh, I love your assistant stories.
Yeah. My assistant, that was interesting.
He was the best. Right?
Yeah.
This is interesting. Recently there was a much noted lawsuit against John McBride for some improprieties with abusing interns, like sending them to get his dry cleaning and bring it to his house.
That's showing up a lot of places now.
Or get like groceries, which like for us coming up in our world, it was like
that was it.
Okay, maybe it's not. I don't do that. I've never had an assistant get something from my house that I can remember or wash my car. I don't do it. But I guarantee you, if they did do it, those would be the assistants that would end up being great.
Oh yeah.
Like that's the litmus test. Like don't feel too bad for the abuse because they're actually going to succeed.
Like I talk about my buddy Jason Goldstein. He's the guy who didn't know anything about recording. Came out to L.A. Went out to L.A. He tarred the roof of Ocean Way. He did coffee. Whatever for everything. But he learned under all these great guys. Eventually became a guy allowed in the room. Eventually became an assistant engineer. Eventually engineered some good stuff. But all the guys that I respect as engineers, that I find are at the top of their game, are guys that came up that way for the most part.
Yeah, when I saw the John McBride thing, I was thoroughly confused. I'm like, I don't get it. What's the lawsuit about?
Oh, it's a cultural. It's just a cultural. It's a different time.
I almost feel like it's a healthy. You can definitely go too far with it.
Sure,
but it's like
guys did.
It's a hazing that needs to happen because once they get welcomed into the studio and you trust somebody to take over a room and to know that they're going to get it right and be able to hold the burden, that's like an honor. But you kind of have to.
Well, it's like if you can't
wear them out first.
Wear them out, and also if you can't get my dry cleaning the right way, how am I going to ever let you into a room? Because some guys there are a lot of people finding their own way. They'll go to the dry cleaner and forget. Did you ask for the second piece of dry cleaning? Oh no, I didn't think to. Oh, there's a lesson. I don't know. All of it has there's a life building.
I think it's a litmus test for these guys that kick ass at that are going to be great making records.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you abuse anybody. And let's face it, how long
some guys were abusive.
That really terrible part of being an intern somewhere only lasts maybe a year.
I mean, there were some nightmare stories back in the day, but I was not party to them. But
we're talking about just stories that we heard about in our lives, our collective lives of almost 100 years of being in the recording studio, sitting here at this table.
Scary.
Well, my favorite, the first day I interned for John, there was a band, and I rolled in thinking I knew everything. Everything. I didn't know anything. But I sat down, and I remember him turning to me, he goes, "You don't get to sit down. Stand up." And like the sitting down is for the band. It wasn't a big studio.
Right.
But I was like,
don't sit in that chair. Because I knew the guy was about to walk in. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of my greatest intern story. I mean, I've got great intern stories where I'll say, "Hey, Mike, the piano," and I come out and the microphones are facing at the piano keys.
Right.
Or
that's learning.
Or say make a vocal booth and they make it a complete circle so that you can't get into the vocal booth, with the gobos. My favorite one for me as an assistant, I was working at a private studio in upstate New York, and I was mixing a record. Nobody can get into this room. So I'm there alone on the property mixing this record. And ironically, it was a Seventh House record, the one I just told you about. And, I'm a working engineer at this point, 15 years into my career. I'm not like the kid trying to bust down doors. So I had to take a break because there was a session coming in. It was Michael Green, who was the president of NARIS at the time. And in comes Simon Phillips on drums, Bunny Burnell on bass. I can't remember the guitar player's name, but a famous dude. Michael Green was playing piano and singing. Frank Filippetti was the engineer.
Frank was another big guy at Right Track. That was his house.
That was his place.
Right Track, yeah.
And Phil Ramone was producing.
Right.
So I knew Frank from New York. So I said, "Hey man, you mind if I stick around?" He's like, "Absolutely, stay, man," because I was going to be going back in 3 days later when they were done. So I'm standing there along this line of famous people as Michael Green comes in to introduce himself. It's just the way it ended up in the control room. He's walking down this gauntlet of shaking hands with people. Goes along all the way. He gets to me, and just out of instinct, and being the last of a line that was 15 people long, I went, "Hey," put out my hand to shake it. And he looked, and he said, "You see this hand?" And I just knew. I braced myself because I knew it was about to happen. He said, "It should never be void of water." And he walked away.
Ugh. Well, I always say is when I was a guy answering phones, there were like three types of people. You'd get...
Fuck that guy, by the way.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
It was just a great story. Like, I'm so glad it happened because now I at least can tell it. It's like, it's so good that it happened, like a 50-hour session. It's like, at a certain point, you're like, this is so cool that it's happening. Now it's like something I'll be able to tell for the rest of my life. And in that moment, I actually had a little bit of that.
Well, you'd be answering phones, and you'd get the three kinds of people. Like, you'd get the engineers like, there's no fucking coffee. Can we get some fucking coffee in here? And you get the guys that are usually a little more experienced, a little bit more respectable. Like, hey, I had a coffee. Would you mind getting some other coffee? Somebody sends someone to make some coffee. And then you'd hear a song, hear some whistling, and someone singing a song about coffee, and it'd be James Taylor walk down the hallway going to make his own coffee. And you kind of get the different level of, like, I found the guys who were the most, like, self-aware that they weren't dicks, basically. They were just real people.
I think that's the best lesson for an intern. You've got three ways to do something. When I was coming up, I always would watch people that I got to work with that were famous and that were really successful. I thought, I want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'd go through their day. And like, as being an intern watching the phones, you got three examples and you got to choose. Yeah. Which one do I want to be?
Exactly.
That's a great story. That's a great instance of, like, that's what an intern should learn. Uh-huh. And they should get their hat handed to them every once in a while.
Phil Ramone was like an old school dude. He'd been around. He believed in some hazing. He believed you had to earn your way in, which I do too. But he wasn't a dick about it. He could be, funny and callous, but it was good-natured and with good intent. It was like, well, figure out you don't know anything. Don't walk in and pretend you do. Don't act like you do.
There's a point,
Be quiet until spoken to. And if you're around, if you're around and quiet for a while, he'll invite you to the conversation. If you come in guns a-blazing, get the fuck out of here.
But this is all a means to an end. There's a point at which these people eventually turn and you get on the other side of the fence with them, which is the reward for a job well done. Learning that you don't sit when you come in and there's a room full of band. That's something that every one of us would do. Mm-hmm. But we just don't know it because we haven't been in that room 1,000 times. It's the job of the engineer to say, hey, man, and you don't have to explain it. You just say, hey, don't do that.
Well, there's people.
Get up.
Some people just get it from the beginning. They have good insight. Like, it's not a guy doesn't make a great assistant if his instincts are to immediately comment on the guitar player's performance or saying how, to sit back and watch.
Was it?
Well, there's a great story. So this band, John, was Mr. North.
Mr. North.
So they had a background part, right? I'm a terrible singer.
It was like gang vocals.
It was gang vocals, right? But it was a harmony part, if I remember.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right.
And everyone was gathered around a mic, and one dude was severely off, right? I was like, it's not me. It definitely can't be me. It was me. It was definitely me.
Like, yeah, can we try it without you in the room? Try it again, maybe.
Mike, step back a little more. Mike, just another step.
Yeah.
Mike, open the door behind you. Step out through the door.
That's basically what happened.
Mike, close the door in front of you. Perfect. We're good.
Magically sounded much better.
Amazing.
My favorite was always, and this wasn't so much the intern, was the drummer who would disappear after tracking day and then show up for the vocal overdubs like a month later and then couldn't keep his mouth shut. And I'm like, if it was so important, why weren't you here every day talking?
Right.
It's like, shut up, please. Like, you're welcome to show up every day, but don't just talk the whole day that you do show up. Yeah. So, but going back, I think it's important to note that there's a moment in which now you and Mike are great friends. You have a lot of respect for Mike. Mm-hmm. So eventually, if this assistant engineer...
He didn't last that long as my assistant. We became good friends.
To engineer relationship, eventually you reach a point where the person accepts you. And then you're on the inside.
Yeah, and I think it happens.
And that's a beautiful part of it.
I think it happens quickly. No, in all honesty, yeah. Mike was sat in a chair. I was in a shitty mood or whatever. It was a little bit of a haze, a little bit me, shit flowing down kind of thing because whatever. I was having a bad day in the studio. But, it wasn't like I was always beating on him the whole time. We hung out and he didn't stay around that often. And it's like, we'd hang out. I was like, yeah, dude, if you want to come around tomorrow, you come around tomorrow. And we ended up, we started working on music together. Whatever it was.
And also, it should be noted for those trying to get in, is I stalked him. When I moved to New York City, I didn't know anybody. Nobody. And he had produced a band that my band used to play with called Sunflower. And I must have called his answering machine at home 25 times and left messages and finally just wore him down. He's like, fine, man, just come in. Just stop calling me.
Well, but also, as I tell people, like, when they submit a song or they send something out, it's like, you got to realize your day sucks, right? You wake up every day, every single person, there's a list of shit they got to deal with. And if it's the wife's on you, whatever it is, you might like, oh God, you're just trying to do what your real job is. Every single person you're dealing with has that day. So just because what you sent out is important, you got to realize they'll get to it, but they got a boss. They got someone telling them this. Everyone's got something that's messing with them, and especially if they're listening to your music or checking out your mix, whatever it is, they want to do it in a way that they can feel relaxed and give you a good take on it. So I used to be so stressed if I send a mix out and hear back in like 10 minutes, And now it's like, if in 2 days you haven't heard back, send a comment. Like, it'll always be, oh yeah, I know, like, she's been on the road for whatever. We're waiting. She wants to listen when she can sit down. I was like, totally cool, But again, because everyone channels it through their own needs.
Right. It's always the worst version to you.
It's a tough
sitting
version.
There waiting.
It's a tough gig. You're sending every single day, even at this point. I send something out, and it's an approval back every single time.
Right. And if they don't like it, they don't like you a little bit.
Right. And you can always fix it, and then it's fine. But
it's a beautiful thing about being a mix engineer. It's like you pour your DNA into the mix. It is like how you see the world. And if they don't like it, they don't like how you see the world.
Right. Exactly. That's definitely a little bit.
And it's interesting that Mike would be like calling you and not realizing maybe from your side of the glass, oh, you're busy, you got all this to do, and you're feeling the same way with the A&R person.
I was just stressed out. I was young in the business. That I didn't have much going on. I was just a hustler, young hustler. Like we're the same age. He just moved to New York a few years later, whatever it was. So
yeah, I'm continually sort of reevaluating the amount of like dumping on people that I do, because I usually find out that I dumped too soon, and then I'll hear some story like where the guy goes, well, or the artist says, well, I've been out of the country, or my phone fell onto the toilet and I haven't had it for 3 days.
And artists are quirky people. I find in country, I haven't done much in country, but just observing from the outside, they're a lot more attentive. They're, as I like to say, the difference between New York and Nashville, or LA and Nashville, is in New York, they stab you in the front. Nashville's a little bit, they will be super kind to your face, even if they are assholes later. But the politeness and the getting back to you, that will happen, because it's like, it's polite. It's what you're supposed to do. Yeah. And so I think you do get that response. But when you deal with like weird artists and other, like some weird, cool, quirky alternative artists, they're weirdos. They're awesome. But they're on another plane. They're doing their own thing. Us engineer type people, we have to have some level of, daily organized acumen in our thing. But a great creative might be just, they need their day to feel what they feel. And you got to allow that. The great music comes out of who knows what kind of mind, and allow that, their whole world is floating in a whole different way than mine is, and not expect the same reality.
I think it's interesting, too, to note that coming up, whenever I would work, I did some television over the years, and when you are working in audio in television, a lot of it is waiting, and you can look around the set. Every director is the same person wrapped in different skin. Every AD, assistant director, was good. The same. Like, whenever you had somebody call you from the production office, if you have a tech from a recording studio, like, they are all the same dude. The tech at Ocean Way is the same dude as the tech from Metalworks in Toronto.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see, like, engineers are typically the same sort
there's
of
a shared
energy
thing. Yeah.
There's so much in common. In the aggregate of that whole thing ends up every once in a while turning out something that's impossible without the sum of its parts, so it's a beautiful thing. But to try to understand each other in regards to working day to day or get things accomplished, we're just different people, drastically different people, and it requires that you be so.
Everyone's creativity comes from somewhere else, and you just got to stay loose with it.
So you ended up did you end up going into production and producing a bunch of records?
Yeah, I produced a bunch. I think I was actually I like producing. It's just I like producing bands. I like rock bands, and it died out a bit. I don't have a studio anymore in LA. Kind of consciously didn't. I was always attached to studios. So after with Pete at Dumbo, I ended up this great studio in Brooklyn called Mission Sound, where I was like the only tenant. I mixed a room. I had a mix room there, but Ollie had it's an amazing recording room, and he just had a lot of great gear, just great guy, great engineer. So we would like co-produce things together, or I'd, hire him to engineer on something that I was producing, or if there was no budget, I would engineer. And so I was able to kind of walk both worlds. I could go into my mix world, and I could walk into the production world there in a great studio. One of my best buddies owned. So it was like really convenient.
There was a Neve in Mission?
Yeah.
An 80 series?
Yeah.
What was it, an 8058?
It was kind of hybrid. I think it was like an 8068, but it was... But yeah, great. Just like, so I miss that. I do miss working with bands. And now the production thing, it's very, guy comes in for a day, you make a track, you leave. I mean, when I'm mixing records now, I realize what's happening is this artist or this lead singer or whatever is going around to, in the writing process to 30 different people in a room with one or two other people. And then at the end, they're deciding which songs they think should make the record. And then they're calling that guy and say, cool, we want that on the record. And they're going back to some demo they made in 1 day or 2 days from 6 months ago. They're throwing drums on it, cleaning up the vocals and sending it to mix. And it's not the same process where you go in and you make the band's album. And I like that.
Yeah, I miss that too. Like going to a room that you don't know upstate New York.
You're in there for a month making a record.
You're in the first day is drum sounds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What a concept.
I learned, so when I was an artist, we got to make great records. We got to work with Steve Thompson and Mike Barbiero, produced our first record up in Bearsville on this gorgeous Neve and this amazing, that experience defined who I am.
That was the casualty of sort of technology. That stuff doesn't really, it's hard to find that. I don't think I've made a record other than making them here, which is similar to that.
But you have that vibe here for sure.
I do, but it's mine.
Right.
It's a different thing to get off the Amtrak train up on in Bearsville area, and go to the hotel. It's like you're on a little bit of an adventure.
No,
here it's
totally.
like this. So I walk here.
But you still get to make records. And look, and again, country, you still put musicians in the room. Even if it's quick and it gets that demo-y process by everyone's walking in for a day and you're banging it out, which has value and they're great players. But I kind of like, there's that, let's all grind. Oh, you know what? Let's go, after working on song 6, you go back and be like, this vibe would be cool for song 3. Let's recut that fucking song. And you go back and do it. That just happens less these days, I find.
It happens much less. And I think it's a real solitary sport. We end up sort of alone a lot. And Mike will end up being in his crib just making a track all day. I'll end up here doing one of the 3 things that I do in a different capacity, but alone. Mm-hmm. And it's like a little bit of that. You miss the camaraderie of people walking in, and it's like, hey, let's go get something to eat. Even if you're not hungry, you sort of just tag along.
And that's the thing I miss most in LA is I left, New York, I came up there, I had my whole group of friends, but moreover, I was attached to a studio. So even though I was mixing on my own, great guys would be coming through, a lot of repeat clients. So the bathroom was in the other room, so water cooler talk. Now I pick up the phone and call Mike as my water cooler talk, who's 2,000 miles away. And if he's not there, I'm like, I call a couple other guys and they're not there because they're in sessions. And it's like, because I'm in LA time and they're in Nashville time. I'm like, all right, guess I'm going back to work. Or I watch an episode of, The Office or something while I eat my food alone and then I go back to work.
But it's a little lonely.
Yeah. It's like I got to make efforts. Like I got to make breakfast meetings and make lunch meetings just to hang out with people instead of have the communal. But there are studios, people do that in LA too. I just I work it on I have a great little setup in my backyard like you have, not like this, but similar.
Well, I think that, for me, I can maybe tend to be a little bit more of a hermit. So there's probably guys that Mike seems to get out and about.
Are you kidding me?
I always hear about you going to lunch with people, and
I'm definitely a hermit.
But Mike talks on the phone a lot.
I talk on the phone.
Yeah, that's true. Me and Mike have had I look down at the phone afterwards.
You go down the list and realize it's you a 50 minutes. There's 5 guys doing 50 minutes. It's not just you. That's the Mike.
He's like a therapist. So in the morning he's got
totally. Mike is the center of everyone's little.
I could put you in on Wednesday at 10:30.
Pretty much.
4:45.
Yeah.
But I guess it's just part of the beast, and it's like anything to do the art, right? Because when you're done with a great record, it's fantastic. What I really want to focus on talking to you about is your mixing career.
Oh yeah.
So you've been able to piece together this career that's like you are the unicorn. You are the guy that's working all day, most days, mixing records
every day.
There's guys out there on the internet telling you how to do it. There's guys on YouTube with long, long videos that I've never heard of telling you how to be a mix engineer and stay employed with funnels happening so that you're directed towards their website. You're not doing any of that because you're in the studio mixing.
That's true.
So
I've been fortunate.
I want to know how you do that. And I want to know what that looks like. I don't need to know what you make, but I'd love to know what it takes to get you to work on a project. Just sort of give us a day in the life.
My biggest thing is I've always been flexible. I will respect the client. If you got a budget, I'll work with it. And I find most guys that do well will. You got, like I said, I've had a lot of singles and doubles, not a lot of grand slams. So you get certain guys that are at the top of the food chain. They've mixed 5 of your favorite records.
You're a Moneyball player.
A Moneyball player, yeah. So these guys are always going to work. They're going to
what's he do? He gets on base.
As we know, with all this shit is, what have you done for me lately? The first, as they say, the A&R's first job when they sign a new band is, what are your 5 favorite records? And they look at those records and say, we can get that guy. And it's when you're not on every one of those records, it perpetuates, and all these guys deserve to be on there, but it keeps the pool kind of small at the very top of this game. All genres, you know. I've been fortunate enough to kind of just say, well, give me a shot at that. Give me a shot at that. And succeed at some level in, I've done a few records that, I tell you, I produced this band called the Damwells in 2003. Does that make sense? I don't think this thing sold 20,000 records, but it's so many bands' favorite band. It literally got me into the Christian market because Christian Paschal, I don't know, Pascal? Christian, however you pronounce your last name, still don't know. Great guy, great drummer, he was a young producer. He's actually now Maren Mars's MD. But at the time he was like doing sessions in Atlanta and loved the record I did. So he would hire me to do these like small budget records. He became the drummer for David Crowder, which is a huge Christian star. He produced one song on this record. I mixed it. David liked that mix, had me mix another one, which ended up being nominated for a Grammy. This is like, you know, so it came out of this tiny thing I did that I put my heart and soul into, and it was a great band. The Damwells are a great band. And like, so I've been fortunate that things have expanded that aren't like household names, but have opened up lots of small windows.
Mike, confirm this. That describes every successful thing I've ever done. Like that pathway that you just talked about. Can you corroborate that?
Yeah, 100%.
People wonder how it is. Everybody that's like getting started is like, how will I become successful?
Right.
What will be my in or my big break?
Right.
That is it.
Right. There's only every maybe 1 year and more like one every 5 or 10 years is there something like Nirvana or something that's gonna, you know, the Killer. You mix a Killers song, you keep working because everyone's gonna keep rediscovering the Killers. Every, you know, my son finds the Killers even though he's 15 now. You know. In general, you just gotta, you know, the one nice thing about mixing is just it's a lot of products. You keep doing things. So I've done a million things that turned into nothing, but because you're constantly working, you produce, you put out maybe 20, 30 things a year. The band might break up.
That's true.
Mixing, you're like bang, 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 bang. It's essentially a song a day, you know, in theory. So you're putting out 100 plus products easy a year. So the likelihood that something will connect.
Well, I just love the story that you've got a relationship with the drummer. You do something for him. He gets an opportunity. Who does he look for? He looks for you.
Right.
Because he trusts you.
Yeah.
You're part of his crew. He came up with you. He knows that you're part. He can come back and have real conversations with you.
Worked with a lot of. I'm still trying to get that out of Mike. But pretty much everyone else I've worked with, I've got the relationship.
For Mike.
No, I don't mix anything.
That's not true, by the way.
It's totally not true. So, and then David Crowder.
And Crowder was a huge...
As a byproduct of you and the drummer having this thing, he now can't deny that he loves what it is that you did. So now this is like how the dominoes fall.
Does that lead to Zach Williams?
I think yes, because look, all these new markets, everyone's got they're all insular in some level. The Christian market is very based in Nashville, so not being in Nashville, I think, is hard to expand. There's some talented guys making records in here, so there's always going to be, for the one record I did, 10 others by other guys. So I stayed a little busy in that, but I think the fact that Dave's got a big, rich voice and Zach Williams has a big, rich voice. I think there was some correlation, if I'm not mistaken, with the label at the time.
John won a Grammy for the Zach Williams.
Right. I was nominated for a Grammy for the Dave Crowder, and then the Zach Williams fell into my lap. I don't know if I think one of them had liked the Dave Crowder record. You know, it came through that. Definitely came through the Dave Crowder fandom that I got asked to mix that record. It was a giant record. They just had a presentation. The album just went gold, and the singles went platinum, and that's big in the Christian market these days. And it all just kind of stemmed from this one.
Did it go myrrh? You see the South Park episode where Carson wants to get quick success in the music business, so he becomes a Christian recording artist. And when it finally is successful, they present him with a myrrh record.
That's amazing.
Instead of gold.
That's so
but
good.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, Neil Darcy would say, I think it went cobalt. You know.
Yeah.
I think it went balsa, in Finland.
I'm sorry, I distracted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's all that happens to me is being distracted. That's the way I get through my life. Full distractions all the time.
Well, okay, so I just think it's an interesting point that, we're not saying that the 100 years of being in the music business that are behind the microphones today is the way it's going to be for people watching. But isn't it interesting that all three of us, if you're wondering how your big break's going to happen, it's going to happen because your friend has an opportunity and you do a kick-ass job. And then the next thing you know, the people that hired that person love what you did. Yeah. And you've got a whole record.
I don't know that any of us were big, and also, I'll very much say that I hustled. I worked hard. I faked it till I made it. I did all those things. I was in New York, not knowing how to run Pro Tools, on sessions, completely out of order, and just faking it. I got totally cursed out by a hip-hop guy because I suck compared to the other guy who knew who was good, and it hurt, and I got better, and, all these different scenarios. That's how I got in with Pete Robinson, who we had a studio with, who we did a record with his intern, made this Lola Ray record, which got picked up, and again, had a bunch of people that were fans of. That got me the manager of the Damwells. So even that started from back then. If you want to go even further back from the Christmas, that got me the James Diener liked the way that record sounded, so he had me do a Gavin DeGraw thing, which opened up a bunch of doors. Like the stripped record. It wasn't like the album, but it was a we'll call it value added product that. But people like that record.
Right.
Oh, I like that one. That wasn't.
But if you're a Gavin DeGraw fan, it's Chariot Stripped, right? Was the name of the record. That's most people's favorite.
Right, because of him. I mean, I mixed it. I recorded and mixed it. And it's cool.
Too?
I did.
It's a necessary part of that.
Totally.
It's like
Totally.
Every great record I've been a part of is only good because the music's there.
And what's interesting about it, it's funny. I was thinking about this. I was talking with someone about a couple days ago. That was like novel at the time. He had done the album, and to Diener's credit, he's like, let's do a version because he's such he's so great on his own. You're missing that. The album's pretty produced, and you miss that thing about Gavin. Let's just put him in a room and just record the album again, like he's just performing. And now everyone, every single half of my work is some
I did
live
that same
version.
exact thing with James Diener with the Flyleaf record.
Right.
We did the acoustic version of their big one, and it was like, it's a great idea. There was a point there where record companies were struggling to just they wanted parts. What I call parts for a record, which is like, hey, there's the acoustic version. There's the one that's, sped up to 140 and is a dance track. There's the, that's the 7-inch. There's all these parts that used to happen on records. And I think it was them trying to figure out, like, how do we get in this new world of people consuming content constantly? How do we keep in front of them? How do we have a Target exclusive so we can have
smaller marketing opportunities? It was like the Best Buy model. I think it was Alanis Morissette, or it might have been Skater Girl.
Avril
Lavigne, I think. And it was like, to get people to start buying it, it was like $5.99. It was like super cheap.
And it had three versions.
And it helped launching that
was
record.
On that record.
Right, and it helped launch the record. With Gavin, I think he was doing well with that first single, and they're like, well, let's re-release it with the second one, so people go back, and it helped get the numbers up, and it helped get the attention up. It was a marketing thing, but you're releasing good stuff with your marketing thing, and it worked because it was good.
So tell us a little bit here. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. How many days on a normal week, if you'll be transparent with us, how many days are you mixing records? How many days are you waiting to mix records?
I'm mixing every day.
You're mixing every day?
Yeah, I tend to be like, I try and do, I try and take the weekend off if I can. Usually I don't, but I'm also like, I'll be tired one day. I also like, my wife's got she's working a new gig. She's busy, so I'll be more, my son's pretty self-sufficient, but I'll leave to go watch his baseball game, so I might only do a 5-hour day. I try and I do my best to let my life still be the things I want it to be. So if it means I work on Saturday, if I get a half day Wednesday, it means I have to work on a little bit on Saturday, a little bit Sunday. So it's not, I'm not that fixed about it.
How long does it take you to mix a song?
Totally depends.
On average, what are you?
I work on so many different genres and so many different things, which is great. I get to, currently, again,
Is it more than a day? Usually not, right?
I would say a day. But if it's...
So we're talking 10 hours.
If it's something recorded, 6 hours. 6 hours of working.
Okay.
Spread out through the day. I take a lot of breaks. I work very, very fast and take breaks.
And you're all in the box.
All in the box.
Which is repeatable.
Repeatable, and just it makes sense with the way I came up. I was learning Pro Tools before I even knew what an aux send was or an EQ did. I was learning it in the box and then was learning consoles later. And while I liked consoles, I wasn't dependent on them because I knew the box better. So it was an easy transition for me. Guys who came up on consoles was maybe a little less so. But
when you're working and it's like, okay, to work every day as a mix engineer, you've got to have a couple silos of work that is priority, that's paying well, that has to get done. And then you have to have this other stack that is like, hey, I can get to you. I won't charge you as much, but I'm going to fill you in on these days.
I try and make that point. My manager will do that for me. Dave Hopper, he'll, Kaplan can fit this in. And I try and be communicative with my
So
clients.
You've got maybe one rate for somebody that's like, hey, I don't have it. But hey, if you can wait, give me 30 days. I'll have this done in 30 days. or 45 days, whatever, depending on how many songs. But I'm going to have to fit it around some other things. Right. That's a version of you keeping your schedule full.
Absolutely.
How else do you keep? Is that the two main ways you do it? Priority money in deadline, and
honestly,
then overflow
my
stuff.
philosophy, because as I think all of us are in this business, you're afraid that if the phone doesn't ring today, you're never getting another call again. It's just like the mentality of this. I was telling Mike, I heard a podcast with Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman, who have been in more movies than anybody. Went out to lunch after a reading. They're like, "Do you ever think you're never working again?" They're like, "Every time." I mean, these guys, it's just the nature of the beast, as you feel that way. So I just say yes to everything and find a place for it. That's kind of my mentality. It's like, what's your budget? If it's really small, I won't do it. But unless it's like my manager, maybe we'll have a client they're developing and they'll say, "Can you do this?"
Or if you have a friend.
Right?
A friend says, "Hey, I'd rather," when someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I don't have a budget. I really want you to mix this one song. I have a role. It's one song.
Yeah.
I don't do records for free.
I don't do song.
I'd rather do it for free.
The only person I do for free is literally the only guy I mix for free.
How often is that?
How's it going, man?
I've done, a couple of them.
That's at Shaq Jones. If you want, all the engineers can hit you up for.
No, I'll mix like my buddy's thing for free. If he's working on something with another artist, like he's always like a component of the thing that he works on. If a friend is producing something or, a co-writer on a track, and there's another artist involved, and they gotta. And I also believe if you can't value your product at your music at some dollar figure, then it's just not worth it.
Right. What are you going to be doing with it afterwards?
Anytime I've done that, frankly, you send in comments, they don't like it or they don't know because you don't even get like, if they don't like what they first hear, when someone's paying for it, you're going to have a conversation and you'll get them there. Because look, I'll say my first pass, it sounds good to me. Might not sound good to you. You can explain to me very clearly what you're hearing. I'll be like, oh, shit, I was hearing a different thing. Give me a minute. And I can guarantee I can make that sound for you. I can get every sound. Maybe not as good as this guy or exactly what you're hearing, but I can it all makes sense to me in my head. So if we have a creative conversation, I can totally sculpt
with
that
people
direction.
That are in the business, it's sort of a hopper. You just get down to the end product. People that are crazy, it's just
they
a
might
nightmare.
hear it and they think it's over. Like, I don't like. A friend of mine, an A&R guy, was like, he remembered he got some mix back, and he thought it was pretty great. And the artist's like, I hate it. Like, what do you mean? I just hate it. I hate it. I was like, well, why don't you come in? Let's talk about it. And they played. He's like, what is hate? I don't like my vocal sound. I was like, what do you like about it? I was like, it's just I don't like all that reverb on it. So then he told the A&R, he called the mixer and said, hey, can you do a version which is like a lot less reverb? And he sent it back. He's like, I love it. So this guy didn't know that there was too much reverb. Yeah. I'll hear a reverb. I love I'll go down a lane. Some people like non-lin reverbs. I love them, but they're quirky. They're 80s.
Yeah.
I will try and stick it in too many places.
That's the Phil Collins Tom reverb.
Yeah, or on vocals, there's these tight slap things. They sound like you're in a bathroom. I love that sound. So I'll definitely try and stick down a few more lanes than it probably belongs. But the minute you tell me you don't like it, I'm like, yeah, I wasn't sure if you're going to like that one. My guess was maybe you seem like you might, so I try. It's like, yeah, I can give you the other one real quick, And it's just, and I'm having fun with my day too. So some days I want to just dig into something. Oh, I'm digging your track, so I'm just doing I'll answer back. Somebody's like, the
15-year-old in you shows up, and you're like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and crank this up.
And it reminds me of a record I liked from when, well, they're not hearing it that way, but that's fine. I can quickly undo what I did. But
so when you're working with somebody, let's say, I don't want to get personal, but I think everybody, I don't mind getting personal, but some people do. I'd like to know what it takes to get on your schedule. If I want to get a song mixed by you, what does it take financially?
Oh, I can't go there.
Okay. So for me,
it's budgetary. But I'll work. I'll fit it in.
For me, I'll tell somebody, it's like, hey, if it's a rate, it's like it used to be a different rate, but now it's $1,500, right? That's going to take the day. And then if there's that's
a fair ballpark.
If there's a special circumstance, for me, it could go all the way down to $750. Under that, I'm like,
Mike's rate.
Under that, I'm wondering, like, should I be doing something else that day?
Well, and
it's not that I don't love the record. It's not that it's not a record that if I want to be a part of it and I really love it and it's like it's going to light me up, I'll find a way to be on that record all the way down to zero. But, and there's records that I've got in the old days whenever the Milk and Honey was flowing, I was getting $3,000 for a song. Mm-hmm. now I'm not any less of a mix engineer.
No.
But the world has changed in regards
There
to
was
what
a
it is
lot
to allow.
more money in that. I kind of didn't realize it till more recently, but that was the peak of the money coming into the music. The music industry was doing great. When we were coming up, the late 90s, the CDs were at their peak. They were charging 60. It was just, they're making plenty of money right now.
I paid $20 for a Will Smith CD for my niece.
There was so much money around. And so guys like us, we were coming up. I was definitely a B person coming up, but I was getting paid a lot of money.
Right.
Now B people are getting paid, not much money. A people are still getting paid.
For me, it was interesting because I went and spent a lot of time in the songwriter world and not focusing on mixing records. And when I came back, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. It changed.
I just got a little worse, or the industry has gone down into the toilet.
And it also just evolves.
You have to accept that this is the new waterline. You know, it's like when you buy Bitcoin, it's like today it's worth this. This is what they value that at. So you still love doing
Bitcoin?
You have a Bitcoin story?
I know. I made some money on Bitcoin.
He did.
Yeah.
So, it's just, I still love mixing records. After this, I've got something I'm mixing.
Yeah.
And I love doing it every day. It's like, but it's like, there's a certain point where it's like, hey, I want to do something else. I want to produce today. I want to write a song today. Sometimes the money's there. Sometimes you're working on records that you're getting paid the rate that you want to get, but it's a soul-robbing job where you feel like you're a plumber for the day.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it ends up being that way. So back to an earlier question about how long it takes. So on an indie thing, say, used to be, it was a band. They'd go in the studio with a guy, spend all their hard-saved money to record, get the drums, a couple guitars, maybe there were a couple keys, some tambourine, background vocals. But it was that day's recording. So we have a 5-song EP. They might only have $500 a song. But I can mix 2 a day because it was the same, basis.
Right.
Now I get some independent stuff, and it takes me a day to sort the track. The pop stuff, because they don't know what they're doing necessarily. Even if they do, there's a lot of information in these tracks. Some of them sound great, but a lot of, young guys still figuring it out. There's just so much going on. It takes a full day to understand what this thing should sound like. So I'm almost not mixing the first day. I'm organizing. I'm like getting it to like 75%. Then I can sit down. So it takes like a day and a half to 2 days for some of these things. And you're still getting your $500 now for like the indie projects. If it's like I used to take them on. It's like, yeah, cool, I'll take your thing on. I got a window next couple of days. I'll bang it out. But I'm still making good money because I'm doing a couple a day. It's harder to do that now.
And how do you say no to people?
I don't know.
Is that tough for you?
I don't say no a lot, but if it's a budget thing, I just can't do it. That's basically. And again, I like to have a manager because I like when they start talking about money, I say I don't talk about money. That's me. I'm not a guy. I don't like to talk about money. Let him talk about money, and he'll call me right on the back. Are you cool with this? And I'll say sure. But I just don't want to be involved in the money conversation. And I like the perception of that too. We'll talk creative. You can email me directly about anything creative anytime you want. When it comes to schedule and I'll even say, oh, dude, I'm sorry, I got busy this weekend, or my kid was sick, or, like my week got crazier than I thought, so I'm pushing it back to next week. I'll be very personal about that stuff. But when it comes to money, I'd rather there be a barrier between me and that. Which makes
Mike,
it easier for me.
how do you say no to people?
Nobody calls me.
That's not true. You get tons of people that want to work with you.
I do all my own
you.
stuff. I mean, as well. I develop all my stuff. I don't really. Nobody calls me really. To
back in the day when you had your publisher, saying, "Hey, we want you to hook up with this person, write with this person."
I used to do all of it, like everything that was sent my way, and then I noticed it started really taking a toll on me, and I just wasn't excited to get into my studio, and I learned my lesson with that I know for me, I can't sustain that. So I have to I have a luxury right now of only working on things that I enjoy. And I'm just lucky that way.
I think for me, I was coming from the same place where I just felt used up. So, at the end of the day, I'd be in a room with someone writing or producing, and I'd be like, I could be spending today with people that I make great music with and that I feel like we have chemistry. And I'm purely today in this room because of money, and I felt like this is a wasted day.
I fill up my days with that. I do that. I still make sure I create, I got a good friend of ours, Godin, moved out to LA not too long ago. We will first of all, I do other things. I do some TV and film music here and there. I fill in my days, not just mixing. I make sure there's something, and there's opportunities still pop up with that. I'm a music supervisor on a film right now, which has opened up pre-record possibilities, which is fun. Like, oh, we need a song that does this, and Gon and I will do it, And he and I are working on a little side project. So he comes in, we work on a song together. It might take forever to get it done.
It's important to have.
But I need that if I can fit it in. But then you get busy. Fortunately, it's been a really good year. I'm really busy. So we're trying, when we finish on that song, it's like, plus I need days off. Like, I need my ears to be fresh. Like, when I take days off, I can listen to podcasts. I won't listen to this one. But I listen to podcasts on my days off. I don't listen to music. I need to step away from music even to start listening to music again, to catch up on records I like. I was like, oh, you like this record? I'm like, I need to I watch sports. I hang out with and my son will even send me a track. I'm like, all right, maybe Monday. I need to clear my head.
My son has been my only context to modern music.
Yeah, my son's good. I like it.
It's great, because the last thing I want to do, I listen to classical music in the car.
Yeah.
Or I listen to NPR.
Yeah.
So anything that's not like the 6, 4, 1, 5, 2 minor,
Bang
1 over
in your
3,
head,
4
yeah.
for the chorus. I can't listen to regular radio. It just drives me bananas,
Yeah.
So my son is, if it gets on his radar and it's enough for him to speak to me about a song, I'm like, oh, I should know about this song.
Yeah.
It's entirely my A&R department. That's Mike's line. His girls were his A&R department for the past 5 years.
I love what it means, like this world of Spotify or whatever, is that, it used to be if you were really into music, you had to know someone at the record store, have an older brother with a big record collection. Now it's like, I'll hear Talking Heads in the car, and my son will then go deep on Talking Heads on his own.
Don't you love it when your kids love good music?
Yeah.
Like my son loves David Byrne.
Yeah.
He loves him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just I glow with pride.
Yeah, totally.
That he loves the Killers, that he loves the Beatles, that he loves James Taylor and Carole King and Joni Mitchell.
And he'll find cool things in lanes of some more popular artist. But he'll go deep on that record and send me a track. It's like, oh, this is cool. I would never go find that because I hear the single, okay, but I'm not going to listen to it. And he'll go, no, but song 8 on this record's amazing. And
you feel like you did something right. Much more than just the result of them listening to their songs. You feel like, I'm actually a pretty good parent. They like Carole King.
Absolutely.
Tapestries. They could have a conversation with an adult about Carole King's record.
Absolutely.
You feel like, okay, I did something right. He's going to be okay. The kid's not going to be in a bell tower with a 30-06, anytime soon.
I have a question for you.
Uh-huh.
If you were to pick any record you've done that's your Jon Kaplan calling card, one record that's the thing you're most proud of that you've mixed, what would you say that is?
I still go back to that. It was early days and probably doesn't sound as good as that Lola Ray record. Because I just know what went into it for me and I enjoyed it. It was the learning, where learning met ability. I was good enough that it sounded the way I wanted it to sound. And I would change things now, but I produced and mixed it. There's just something about that record to me. They were just the first ones. But from a pure mixing standpoint.
What was the name of it for anybody listening?
I don't know. What was the name of that record? Oh,
Automatic?
That was the single, was Automatic Girl. I don't know. You don't know me. I don't know you. Something like that. I can't remember. I'm bad at names.
So of all the records that you've done that were popular, what was one that you felt was actually
really like
a good showing
the
for
August
you?
Anna record that I mixed a bunch of songs on. A couple years back. And I got good response. I'll meet, again, that's another band a lot of the artists like my buddies on tour with Brett Young. They were playing with Thomas Rhett, and the whole band, they were fans of mine because I mixed that. I was like, well, they're really nice guys. We're just hanging out, but because of that record, it was like, oh, that's cool. It just moved them that album did something for them. Great songwriter, great voice.
Because there's so many records that become notable that people know, but maybe aren't. For me, I don't feel were my best showings. It's like, totally. I wish that the other record had gone and blown up rather than that one that was just kind of I was treading water on that record. I maybe didn't knock it out of the park.
There's a point of I stopped listening. It's hard for me to go back and listen. I'll listen right when the record's done. And I like a lot of stuff I'm working on right now. I just mixed the Black Pumas, both their singles that are out right now. And those guys are just great. And I just really love, it's so real and the mixing is kind of easy in a way that it's just recorded really well and it just sounds like it's supposed to sound. So it's hard because you really don't fuck it up. That's a different kind of assignment, and I like that because sometimes you're getting in there, you're twisting knobs, you're trying to make a sound, which I like also. But this is just let's just make sure I add what it needs without taking away what it doesn't. Taking away what it needs. Yeah, whatever.
How much on average, is fix versus mix?
Depends on what's coming at you, but like song to song, yeah. I mean, some of it's a lot of fix, and I mean, a big problem I get now is I'll get again these more, if pop's the right word, or pop alternative, where they've done this demo, it's got a cool vibe, totally awesome. They decide to add live drums. These guys don't really know how to. We came up recording live. I can record pretty good live drums. You can record probably great live drums, and you know how to edit them, and you understand immediately how that they'll record them and they'll edit them like to the grid without noticing that they're still flamming with the kicks and snares. So the phase is like
of the
programming. So I have to go in and edit, basically. And it's that you could have a conversation and have them resend it, but it's just, no, in an hour I'll be done, and you just do it. So things like that, like solving. And then guitar. No one knows how to record guitars anymore a lot of the time. So you get, again, it's part of this cool creative process where people have every tool at their disposal. And if they're smart and creative, like Beck made those records, you plug something in, you make a noise, it sounds cool. His early records, same kind of thing. But it's a DI guitar, and the plug-in choice wasn't, they just went with it, but it really wasn't what they wanted. So then you got to like go create a cool guitar sound, which can be fun to do, but it can also be, out of something that wasn't that great, it can be a lot of work.
Tell me your revision process, because I struggled for a long time. Like, when you're done with a record, let's say someone pays you X. You get paid X when you deliver the first version of the song, let's say, hopefully,
Yeah,
right?
Half up front.
Half up front, half when you deliver a version that's considered a master, we'll say.
Yep.
Okay, they say, oh, we want to have a dialogue. Now, do they go back on the clock? Do you prorate that? Is there a charge for that, or you just throw in a couple rounds?
I generally throw in. Just the way the world works now.
When do you go back on the clock? When someone's being insane, how do you get back onto the clock?
I just say it at some point. Like, God, you're driving me nuts.
Yeah.
I've quit, and they've come back. I've been like, I can't do this anymore. And like with good clients I still work with now. I'm not going to say names, but like, it's like, you're driving me insane. Version 4 was plenty, and this is version 8 where you're like having me turn this thing up and down 3 times. It's like, I can't tell you the difference, and no one cares. It bothers you, and I get it, but have someone else do it then. So I've walked away, and I walked away from like twice in my life where we couldn't figure out whatever I was doing. They couldn't enunciate what they didn't like or whatever. And I just said, fine, go to someone else.
I think it's an artist's responsibility to have a budget. A lot of people will call me and say, hey, we don't have a budget. I'm like, well, why don't you figure out your budget then call me back? Because then we can actually have this conversation that you called up to have.
Yeah.
And then whenever we go through the revision process, I usually say, hey, one person will send a punch list, because you don't have the bass player saying turn up the bass and the guitar player saying, turn down the bass.
Organize the list.
Organize the list. Go through it. And, I always say there's 2 rounds of revisions included. And then we go back on the clock, and I usually give them 4 rounds of revisions. Yeah. And then if they get cuckoo, then we go back on the clock.
I tend to just do it. So many of the revisions, look, if it's a aesthetic difference, you deal with that. The rest of it takes me 5 seconds for most of those revisions.
Right, it's very fast.
It's literally like, yeah, just turn that one thing. Oh, can you mute we listened to the second time. Can you just mute that background? We ended up not liking that background. It's like, fine. It takes me 5. Right. It's a little annoying, but it's like,
well, I do it. People think you're a great guy for doing it, and they have a little bit of like. I think
relationships, a reason for my success outside of successful records, bringing you more business is, I think I try and be fast. I try and be efficient, and
fair.
I try and be fair. You'll get what you get. I want you to like what you got. You hired me for this, so I want you to end up with something you thought was great. If you suck and you're annoying, but if it's good work and it's good I can tell this is great. This guy put his heart and soul into it. Some of it, look, there's a lot of records. They come in my door and I'm getting paid. I can tell you the minute I turn it on that this thing is not going anywhere. It's not good. It doesn't sound that good. The guy's voice isn't good. The song's not good. Whatever it is. And you're like, okay, I'm still mixing it, and I'll be kind. And more often than not, I deliver that first mix, and they're so blown away because their threshold for knowing what's good is like low. They're just they're astounded. So you walk the line on each case. I'm flexible with that situation.
I think at the end of the day, if you want the best for the person doing it, like when someone's song comes across my desk, I'm like, this is their song. I'm going to be with it for the day, and I'm in care and custody of it. But I have to want the best for them. And if I think like there's something in their mind that they're trying to get to, maybe we can get to that from these tracks, maybe we can't.
Right.
But it's like, I have to assume their intentions are good and that there's something there that, for me, I'm like, okay, I want to be compelled to get to the center of what they want. And if we can't, we'll go back on the clock. And I find that they make decisions pretty quickly whenever it's prorated at a rate.
Yeah.
They end up at a point
I don't
that you
get
end
in
up
that
sort of
situation that often where it's just a forever. I just don't.
And I think you're right from earlier. Mostly inexperienced
revision
people.
Revision 1 will get me really close. And then you're like, oh, can you just... And then they realize, certain situations are what they are. You work with certain bands. There is a manager that's a pain. There's the artist. There's the producer because they're doing so many tracks. That guy has a manager. So it's certain high-level things you get.
Right.
There's just an infrastructure, and it's better to play the game than be a pain in the ass, because being a pain in the ass just doesn't end up paying. I've learned that. You just kind of keep saying... I've been told by multiple A&R guys in different processes, what worked as I did demos, whatever it was early in my career. Like, the demos sound great. Moreover, the band enjoyed the process, and it made it really easy for me. Because their job sucks. They have to deal with everything all day long. So if you can make, I don't want to know what was wrong with the tracking. I just want the mix to sound good. Like, I used to bitch to, P. Robbins, who's a good friend. I was like, oh my God, this thing was recorded. He's like, I don't want to know. Just make it sound good. Because we're great friends. And he just I got this shit going on over here. I got this shit going on over here. My girlfriend's driving me nuts. Whatever it is, just I can make it sound good. It's like, okay.
The other thing that is in human nature is that everybody wants to have a little bit of intellectual property into the mix.
Yeah.
I came up with this little trick in New York City that I would print a version, and then I'd print a version that was maybe hyped, and I'd call it the hot mix.
Oh, I always print. They approve a hot mix.
So I would give them what I thought was what we'd call the full mix, right? That's what we call our first version. Is that what you call it? So this song title full. Usually that was what I would submit. Then I would do one that was hyped. Maybe it had a multi-band compressor on it. Maybe it was hyped high end. Maybe it was just more compression on the two bus, and I'd call it the hot. And in which case that I didn't think the hot mix worked, I would just send the full mix again labeled hot.
Right.
Because I found that once people, as simple as them saying on an attachment, I prefer the hot mix, and they usually prefer the hot mix.
Well, it's louder.
Well, even if it wasn't, sometimes it was the same file. So I would send the hot mix if it made sense and it sounded good. That was my goal. If it didn't sound good, I would just send the other mix, the original mix, twice and name it separately. And I found that people got a great deal of peace out of making a decision between the two mixes.
Yeah, I see that.
And they had kind of filled that little void that was like, oh, I need to make a decision that creatively on this record. Rather than tell him to change the snare sound, I'm going to choose the hot mix. And it was done. And my revision process went down to almost zero, for a period there with that. And I think it's an interesting thing to be like, okay, these people care enough that they want to be involved in the mix. So let's, I don't want to be nefarious or abscond with these people's decisions by sending the same mix twice. It's not my intention, but I think there's something to be said that there's something in everybody. Even if your mix is perfect, they're going to have something to say about it.
I think I got a pretty good beat on those guys, who that is pretty quickly, and I try to learn to deal with them. But I'll be pretty honest. I'm Mike. No, I am a straightforward fucking guy. At some point, I'll be like, hey, listen, I think, I will just tell them in an email. I think these choices, I'll be just honest. And if this, in a nice way, that I'm not so sure this is headed in the right direction for this reason. If you think it is, let's get on the phone. We'll talk it out. And I'll just say it. I'll do it nicely. I'll be honest. And almost always they'll back
maybe you're
up.
the wrong guy for the record. Right?
Yes.
At a certain point, maybe from a psychology or an approach for thought process of the record.
But no, even when it's
record.
not that, even when it's just heading down this lane of this involvement, I'll just kind of call it out in a way, and it goes away. So instead of sending it all, it's similar, but I tend to just call it as I see it.
So what are you doing in Nashville?
I came down. I was in New York visiting with my mom, and just my managers had a party, and I was like, you know what, makes sense. I like to come down every few months, take a few meetings, see Shaq. We're gonna maybe make some hot beats later.
Nice.
Fire.
I just, it turns out all my best friends that came up in the New York scene all live here, pretty much.
Yeah.
They're all down here, so it's just a fun visit.
When are you moving here?
Yeah, I'm not coming. I like
you weren't
LA.
going to LA, you're not coming here?
Well, if my wife's job took us to LA, and it took us a long time to decide we wanted to be there, and now we're happy.
Well, good. Well, we're so glad you decided to spend some of your time with us here, and I know that you don't have much time here in Nashville.
I got nothing else to do.
Jon Kaplan,
keep going.
Great mix engineer. Where can they find you, John?
What is it? Mixed by Kaplan.
Okay. .com?
Sure.
.net?
.com. It is mixed by Kaplan.
.org? .gov? What is it?
Mixed by Kaplan, or Hard 8 Management. Hard 8 Working Group Management.
Okay, great. And I'm not going to ask what Hard 8 stands for. It just sounds like we'd have to edit it out.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I got to ask Dirk later. It's the other guy. Yeah, working group was his.
Okay. I'm Joe West. You can find me at joe-west.com or the school was apprenticeacademy.net. Mike Shimshack is...
I still don't have a website. It's at Shaq Jones, ShackJonz on Instagram.
You're going to break my heart when you get that website.
I'm not getting one. Don't worry about it.
And thanks to Mr. Vaughn Head, our producer and engineer.
Thanks, Vaughn.
You're welcome.
Thank you for a great day, as always. And Maxine, where's she at? She's somewhere around here? She's in the chair? Mm-hmm. All right, until next time, we will see you. This is Joe and Mike signing off from the West Barn.